Congressman Byron Donalds thought he could embarrass Jasmine Crockett with a simple laugh during a House Financial Services Committee hearing. The Florida Republican's smug chuckle echoed through the chamber just as the Texas Democrat finished her opening statement about banking inequalities. But what happened in the next 30 seconds erased that smile and left the entire room stunned. Donalds leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed, his familiar, confident grin settling in. 44. The two-term congressman from Naples had built a reputation on dismantling liberal arguments with conservative logic. Crockett, 43 and also serving her second term, might have seemed like an easy target. A former public defender from Dallas. Talking systemic banking issues to financial experts, he wasn't worried. But the moment he let that laugh escape, the cameras captured everything. Donalds shaking his head, his gold wedding ring glinting, as he gestured toward Crockett with barely veiled contempt. Committee members shifted uncomfortably. Republican aides in the gallery exchanged looks, realizing their colleague may have just walked into dangerous territory. And Crockett's expression recorded in crisp high-definition changed. Gone was the polished composure. What emerged was the cool focus of a trial lawyer who'd just been handed the winning argument. She placed her notes down with deliberate precision, locked eyes with Donalds, and delivered the words that would trend within minutes and define both of their careers. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Democratic staffers leaned in, sensing something seismic. Republican aides stared at their phones, likely typing frantic texts. Even the C-SPAN camera crew seemed to instinctively focus tighter, aware they were filming political lightning. This wasn't their first clash. Donalds and Crockett had crossed swords in smaller hearings, but this time, the stakes were higher. Their contrasting styles as boardroom polish versus her courtroom fire had been building toward this confrontation for months. To understand why the moment exploded, you need to know who they are and what the hearing represented. Byron Donalds is everything modern Republicans like to showcase. A black conservative who rose from Brooklyn to Congress. A businessman, a devout Christian, and a proud member of the Freedom Caucus. He's sharp, media-savvy, and never backs down. From a fight that morning, in his Navy suit and with facts in hand, he came prepared for battle. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, who represents Texas's 30th District, a black woman from Dallas, former public defender, and rising Democratic firebrand. She built her career on defending those the system ignored. Her style, smart, grounded, and fearless. That day, she wore a tailored black blazer and hoop earrings that flashed as she adjusted her notes. Her appearance said she belonged unapologetically. Crockett came prepared, not with generic talking points, but with real stories collected from town halls and church basements. Families denied loans despite flawless credit. Veterans flagged by automated systems for unstable income. For her, this wasn't just policy, it was personal. And the House Financial Services Committee hearing was anything but routine. It was a high-stakes debate on regulations that could impact millions of Americans. Democrats pushed for oversight to prevent discrimination. Republicans warned of government overreach. The hearing began, like many others, formal, procedural, forgettable. But Crockett's opening statement changed that. She painted a vivid picture of economic injustice. A Latina mother denied a business loan. Black veterans blocked from opening checking accounts. Families shut out of the system due to flawed algorithms. This isn't about handouts, she said, it's about access to the financial system that defines the American dream. Then came the chuckle. That subtle but unmistakable sound of condescension. Donald shook his head and rolled his eyes. C-SPAN caught it all. Even some Republicans looked uneasy. Chairman McHenry shifted forward in his seat, ready to intervene. Crockett stopped mid-sentence. Her voice dropped into the kind of calm that only lawyers know, the quiet before they strike. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did something about economic discrimination against black and brown families strike you as funny, Congressman Donalds?" Donalds seemed caught, but pride kept him on a fence. He leaned in, that smug grin still curling. "What I find amusing, Congresswoman Crockett, he said, is this constant need to blame systemic racism for every economic disparity. Instead of focusing on personal responsibility and financial literacy, the room erupted. Democrats muttered and shifted. Republican aides typed furiously. Donalds pressed on, confident in his rhetoric. I've built businesses. I've seen how these programs work. Instead of playing victim, maybe we should teach people how to build wealth and make smarter choices. His tone was soaked in condescension. The implication that Crockett didn't understand the issue was not lost on the room. And then, he added what would seal the moment in infamy. Interesting that we're hearing about banking inequality from someone whose district has some of the highest crime rates in Texas. Maybe if communities were safer, banks would invest more. But the tension in that room wasn't just political. It was generational, ideological, even cultural. Here were two successful African Americans in Congress but with polar opposite views of how progress is made. Donalds embodied the conservative ethos, personal effort, market solutions, individual merit. Crockett represented the progressive fight. Remove systemic barriers. Level the playing field. Confront uncomfortable truths. They weren't just debating policy, they were debating America's soul. Crockett sat motionless. Donalds leaned back, arms folded, proud of his performance. Chairman McHenry began to call for order, but Crockett raised a single finger. The room froze. That slight gesture held power. Donalds had expected outrage, but Crockett's stillness was more dangerous. It was strategic. Mr. Chairman, she said, I'd like to respond to the congressman's observations. And in the next 2 minutes, she delivered a verbal dismantling that became the most watched clip of the year. Crockett stood, slowly and deliberately. Her voice was even sharp and surgical. Congressman Donalds, thank you. Your comments illustrate precisely why stronger regulation is needed. You dismiss real disparities as victimhood, and then suggest that high-crime communities deserve less access to financial services. That's not just bad economics, it's dangerous thinking. Donalds shifted in his seat. You want to talk financial literacy? Fine. I represent a district where the average household earns $45,000. You represent one where it's $65,000. I represent neighborhoods redlined for decades. You represent areas where wealth has been preserved for generations. He moved to speak. She stopped him cold. I'm not finished. You had your time to lecture, now it's my time. The room was silent. Even the stenographer paused. I worked my way through college and law school. I defended people who couldn't afford representation. And I watched as banks used objective criteria that always seemed to disfavor the same communities. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and opened it. You brought up my district. Let's talk data. In the last 5 years, banks in your district approved 78% of small business loan applications. In mine, 23%, same credit scores, same plans, same collateral. The only difference? Zip code on skin color. Donalds flushed. His staffer typed furiously. Crockett held the room. You say build wealth? Hard to do when banks won't lend. When your address disqualifies you. When your race is an invisible minus sign. This isn't about handouts, it's about fairness. And with that, she sat. Not a sound in the room. Even Donalds had no comeback in a single exchange. Crockett redefined the debate not just for that hearing, but for a nation watching. And Donalds, he may have walked in ready for a fight, but he wasn't ready for Jasmine Crockett. You mentioned crime statistics, as if poverty and lack of economic opportunity have nothing to do with crime rates. As if communities systematically denied access to capital and investment for generations should somehow transform overnight. Her voice carried the passion of every closing argument she'd ever delivered, every client she'd ever defended, every family she'd ever fought for. Let me tell you about Maria Gonzalez, the woman I mentioned earlier. She applied for a $50,000 loan to expand her catering business, perfect credit score, 785 years of profitable operations. but the algorithm flagged her application as high risk because of her address. That same week, a restaurant in your district, owned by a donor to your campaign, by the way, got approved for $200,000 with a 720 credit score. The gasps were audible. Even Republican members looked uncomfortable as Crockett pulled out specific documents. "Oh, you didn't know I'd done my homework, Congressman? You thought you could laugh at my concerns and dismiss my constituents' struggles with your talking points about personal responsibility." Donalds tried to speak again, but Chairman McHenry, sensing the moment's volatility, motioned for silence. Crockett's voice dropped to a near whisper, compelling everyone to lean in. "But here's what really bothers me about your response, Congressman Donalds. You're a black man. You know, or you should know, what it feels like to be judged, dismissed, and underestimated. Yet here you sit, laughing at other people's struggles, repeating the same rhetoric once used to justify discrimination against our grandparents." The impact was immediate. Several in the gallery audibly gasped. Democratic members looked stunned. Even some Republicans shifted uneasily, realizing this had gone far beyond routine political sparring. "You built businesses, but do you know what my constituents could build if they had the same access to capital, the same networks, the same opportunities you've enjoyed? They could build generational wealth instead of surviving paycheck to paycheck." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the knockout. "And since you brought up my background and qualifications, let me remind you I didn't inherit my seat. I didn't get here through family connections or political favors. I earned it by fighting for people who needed a voice. I've spent years in courtrooms across Texas, defending clients most lawyers wouldn't even meet with." Donald's confident smile vanished. He fidgeted with his pen, eyes darting between Crockett and the cameras capturing every moment. "So when you laugh at my concerns about banking inequality, you're not just laughing at me, you're laughing at Maria Gonzalez. You're laughing at the veteran who can't get a car loan despite his service. You're laughing at the young family trying to buy their first home in a system built to keep them as renters forever." She closed her folder and looked directly into the camera past Donald's, toward the millions she knew would see this clip. "Online, that's not the conservative values I grew up respecting. That's not the Republican Party my grandfather supported. That's cruelty disguised as policy." The silence was deafening. Donald sat frozen, visibly rattled. Chairman McHenry looked like he wanted to call a recess, but couldn't interrupt the moment. Crockett finally sat down, straightened her blazer, and addressed Donalds one last time. "Congressman, the next time you feel like laughing at someone's struggle, maybe take a moment to remember where you came from and ask yourself, am I building bridges or just burning them?" The room erupted. Democratic members applauded, violating committee decorum. Republicans sat in stunned silence. Donald stared at his notes, clearly shaken. His political instincts scrambling to recover from a moment that would define his career for all the wrong reasons. As soon as Crockett finished, phones buzzed across the hearing room like angry hornets. Staffers typed frantically. Reporters filed breaking news. Social media managers prepped for the digital tsunami they knew was coming. Within minutes, #Crockett destroys Donalds began trending. The clip, swiftly edited by Democratic digital teams, spread like wildfire on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. The reactions said everything. Democratic members looked like they'd witnessed a political masterclass. Progressive commentators online hailed her. "This is what fighting back looks like. This is how you handle condescending conservatives." Even more telling were responses from the other side. Conservative commentators who usually defended Republicans struggled to justify Donald's tone. A prominent GOP strategist tweeted, "There's defending conservative principles and then there's whatever that was." Donald stepped in it big time. Donald's attempted damage control with a follow-up statement. But his voice lacked the confidence from earlier. "I think the Congresswoman mischaracterized my comments. I have great respect for her service and her district. My point was simply that we need comprehensive solutions that address root causes, not just symptoms." But the damage was done. It sounded like what it was, a politician Backtracking after being caught on camera, Chairman McHenry finally called for a recess, but the real action had already moved online. The original C-SPAN clip crossed 100,000 views in the first hour. Democratic accounts saw a 400% spike in engagement. Progressive fundraising platforms lit up. Crockett's campaign, and others like hers, received a flood of donations. Even Fox News struggled to defend Donald's. One primetime host called the moment an unforced error that handed Democrats a perfect campaign ad. Conservative think tanks and GOP strategists issued blunt assessments. You don't dismiss constituent struggles. You don't laugh at legitimate concerns. And you definitely don't challenge a civil rights attorney on discrimination. The media firestorm was relentless. Political podcasts dropped emergency episodes. Late-night comedy shows started writing jokes before the hearing even ended. Interestingly, criticism came from inside the GOP too. Several Republican women confided to reporters they were uncomfortable with Donald's tone, even if they agreed with his policy views. A former congresswoman tweeted, "You can be conservative without being condescending. This ain't it," by nightfall. Jasmine Crockett for Senate was trending even though she wasn't running. Act Blue reported a 300% spike in donations to progressive candidates, many citing the hearing as motivation. The financial services industry took notice. Major banks, previously lobbying quietly against new regulations, issued public statements pledging new community investment initiatives. Clearly, Crockett's moment had moved more than just hearts, it had moved boardrooms. Within a week, 3 major banks announced programs to address lending disparities. 2 financial firms updated their algorithms. While correlation isn't causation, insiders admitted Crockett's viral moment forced overdue conversations. Her star rose fast. Speaking requests poured in from universities, nonprofits, and media. Interview requests came from major outlets, podcasts, and magazines. In the House, she quickly became a go-to voice for financial equity. Colleagues now regularly yielded time to her during hearings. The confrontation didn't just affect 2 careers. It reshaped the conversation around banking discrimination and representation in politics. Suddenly, banking inequality wasn't a dry policy issue. It was about Maria Gonzalez. It was about families boxed out of the American dream by algorithms and zip codes. Local news outlets across the country began investigating lending practices in their areas. Redlining and digital bias became headline issues again. Business schools incorporated the hearing into ethics case studies. Law schools used the clip in advocacy training. Harvard's Kennedy School added it to its crisis communications curriculum. Even international observers took note. European media covered the hearing as both an indictment of American inequality and a display of powerful democratic accountability. The BBC aired a segment on how social media was turning congressional hearings into high-stakes public theater. While no single moment can change policy, the political cost of inaction suddenly became very real. Jasmine Crockett's takedown of Byron Donalds became a case study in preparation, in passion, and in the power of being underestimated. The lesson was clear: and underestimate a black woman with receipts at your own peril. Voters saw a contrast between those who dismissed and those who defended. And in an era when many feel ignored by their leaders, Crockett showed what it looks like when someone truly fights for you. 2 weeks later, Crockett addressed the moment in a local interview. "I didn't come to Congress to go viral. I came to fight. And if fighting for people makes some uncomfortable, that's the price of progress." And with that, she proved that the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting even. On national television, with facts, receipts, and the moral clarity that comes from never forgetting where you came from, more who sent you to fight.